Thank you all so much for being here. I did want to point out that as part of the advanced email for this session, a glossary of acronyms was sent. You shouldn't need it for this session, and we will try our very best not to use too many acronyms today. But in the event that we slip up, please feel free to lean into that resource and utilize it. So with that, I will go ahead and just make a few introductions of our presenters. We have Trudy Phillips here with us today. She's with the Natural Bridge Appalachian Trail Club. She's been a longstanding member of ATC's Stewardship Council, which she just rolled off from, but she's also chair of an agreements task force that is ongoing also with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and a number of our cooperative management partners. Wendy Jansen is the Appalachian National Scenic Trails Superintendent with the National Park Service. I'm Leanna Joyner, Program Director for Volunteer Relations with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. Sandy Mara is ATC's President and CEO. And Sean Thomas is the Appalachian Trail Liaison for the southern region of the Forest Service. It's always good to start with the origin of something, and I know each of us has our origin story for the AT. And so I would ask you, what's your first exposure to either the idea of the AT, like when you first heard about it, or your first exposure to the trail itself? And I'll talk a little bit about the history of the AT and how we got to where we are today. Ben Mackay was a landscape architect, and he was responsible for conceiving the idea of the AT. He grew up reading works of American naturalists and poets and taking long walks in the mountains of Massachusetts and Vermont. In 1921, he wrote a piece called A Project in Regional Planning that really envisioned the Appalachian Trail. And more than the Appalachian Trail even, he proposed a network of work camps and communities in the mountains along the trail. And the trail he envisioned ran from the highest point in New England to the highest point in the South. He was really convinced, and it really comes through in this document, that the pace of urban and industrial life around the East Coast was harmful to people. And he really envisioned the AT as a path interspersed with these wilderness communities where people could go and renew themselves. The idea of the trail really took off. The wilderness camps, and not so much these wilderness communities, but the notion of the trail certainly captured the imagination of people and inspired them, and they began building it. In 1925, Mackay gathered the first meeting of folks centered on the idea of implementing the Appalachian Trail. That was the first convention of the Appalachian Trail Conference, and the Appalachian Trail Conference has since become the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. In 1936, the trail was a completed footpath. It was connected, but it wasn't protected. And so it is of high importance to folks that were busy building it and caring for it, that it got the time and attention to make sure that it had longevity. In 1937, Myron Avery and Edward Ballard had a vision for protecting this trailway. Ballard also was a volunteer with AMC, but he was also a National Park Service field coordinator. So together, Myron Avery, who really championed the growth of the trail on the ground with the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club and the Appalachian Trail Conference, they thought, we need better protection for the land that the trail rests on so that it is protected. And so they thought this idea would come through legislation and protected lands. They worked, and then their work was followed by Murray Stevens of New York and Stanley Murray of Tennessee, who later led the Appalachian Trail Conservancy in the 50s and 60s. And in 1968, their dream was realized. The National Trail System Act established the Appalachian National Scenic Trail as one of the first national trails. And 10 years later, in 1978, an amendment authorized funding for the acquisition of privately owned lands and really accelerated the rate of protection of lands to benefit the AT. The AT has been the most successful land acquisition project in the National Park Service. And so that is saying quite a bit about not only the vision to build the trail, but the vision to protect the trail, and where that's brought us to today.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sean Thomas. I'm the administrator for the Florida National Scenic Trail with the Forest Service, and I work for Region 8, which is in Atlanta. based in Tallahassee, Florida, though. Since last October, I've had the pleasure of serving as the Appalachian Trail liaison for the Forest Service in the southern region, and really am enjoying it. It's really an honor. Honestly, what really makes this job so special is working with organizations like yours, in the clubs and the volunteers. And so now being able to share two different trails and experiences with that is just fantastic. I want to start by thanking you for the work that you do. Thousands and thousands of volunteer hours that go into these national trails. And so they're truly not possible without your efforts. And the Appalachian Trail certainly being the mother of all the trails. I'll talk a little bit about the National Trail System viewed on the map here, but there's 30 national scenic and historic trails in the country. 11 national scenic trails. So truly treasures in our country, together with more than 1,000 national recreation trails. We have the National Trails System. And so we have National Park Service, the Forest Service, and Bureau of Land Management administer the National Scenic and Historic Trails, most of which in the Park Service. The Forest Service administers 6, 1 historic trail and 5 national scenic trails. But nearly all of them have nonprofit organizations that really do the work and make these trails possible. And so I don't think that that's lost on any of us agency folks. And with the organizations, really the power, not just in the maintenance effort, but telling the story and the advocacy. I'll also mention that there's a national partnership organization that kind of acts as an umbrella, the Partnership for National Trail System, of which the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and Florida Trail Association and many of the other scenic and historic trails are members of. So for those of you that don't know about them, they do a lot of the convening between agency and nonprofit partners and discussions, and then some important advocacy work on the federal level. I'll talk a little bit too about just what relationship we have with our national scenic trails as a country, and really like to think about it as these trails really connect people. They connect people and places and communities. They tell our story as Americans, but it's so important. And without the grassroots efforts that went into these trails, we just wouldn't have them. I think a good example of the success story is the AT. You have this, for the most part, protected corridor from Maine to Georgia that is in perpetuity. And that wouldn't happen by agencies purchasing land or even land trusts or partner organizations. I think it's the people that want that to happen and be protected and preserved that make it possible. The Forest Service has 158,000 miles of trail between the National Scenic Historic Trails and the other national trails on forest system land, which is equivalent to the federal highway mileage. So it's truly an important resource. We get over 80 million people a year that recreate on national trails. And so one of the things that we're looking at is how do we sustain the management of these trails in the future? And a big part of that is through partnerships. Just something to think about: what benefits are bestowed on national scenic and historic trails as a result of that congressional designation? Or in other words, why does it matter? Why is it important, permanency of these trails? So I think that you're going to see, well, I know you're going to see a major initiative from the Forest Service to partner in more ways with our nonprofit organization and volunteers in the coming year and in the years ahead, particularly with the Great American Outdoors Act and with a 10 Years Trails Challenge. Related to the question, they also give us requirements as federal land managers to protect the trail and the trail tread, but also the trail corridor. And so with the federal designation, we have to, any projects that may impact the trail, we have to consider the impacts, we have to analyze the impacts, and we have to account for the trail. We're also required by law to engage with partner organizations. You know, those are important legal aspects of the National Trails designation beyond just the protection of the trail tread. One other aspect of this cooperative management strategy that I meant to mention earlier was the partnering of our sister agencies. 5 years ago, going on 5 years, we established this National Trail Administrators Roundtable, in which agency administrators from the Park Service, Forest Service, and BLM meet regularly to discuss challenges, work on best management practice, and ways that we can engage our partners better. And so, it's just been another tool for us to talk across agencies and try to have a consistent approach to really elevate the National Trail System. So, together, I think, with the theme of this meeting of cooperative management, I'd just like to wrap up with that in the thought of shared work together. So whether it's our agencies working together, our partner organizations working together, the on-the-ground maintainers, if you're doing office work or advocacy work in your local community, that's really the power behind the trail system. So again, thank you for your efforts, and I look forward to being part of this going forward.
Well, everyone, it's wonderful to see you. Good evening. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. As always, thank you for all that you do each and every day to preserve and protect the AT. All of your work is so appreciated by all of us with the National Park Service and across the cooperative management spectrum. Appalachian National Scenic Trail is a unit of the National Park System, but I always say it's so much more than a footpath. It's the largest protected contiguous corridor east of the Mississippi River within a model cooperative management system for which your engagement is critical in your involvement. If you didn't know, approximately 3 million people from around the world visit the AT via one of its hundreds of access points every year. It has the second largest boundary of any unit of the National Park Service after Wrangell-St. Elias National Park in Alaska. We have roughly 300,000 protected acres of land in total, and 130,000 of those acres are directly administered by our National Park Service office. And we're going to try and avoid acronyms, but I just want to say APA is the National Park Service acronym for the Appalachian National Scenic Trail Office. So it's going to make it much easier if I can just refer to us as APA and our team. And when we think of the AT, I really want everyone to think about the trail in terms of scope and scale. And once again, the largest protected contiguous corridor east of the Mississippi. And also when I talk about the AT, I always refer to the power of place, the power of people, and the power of partnership. And all of you are critical to the success of that partnership. But within the 14 states that the AT traverses, we cross 6 National Park Service units and 2 national wildlife refuges. And our friends and colleagues at Marsh Billings Rockefeller, we have on the list, even though the AT does not traverse that park, we've been talking to them for years about a side trail, and they're great partners. AT also traverses 74 state parks, forests, and other lands, and many of you work with those individual forests and state parks, and 8 national forests. And once again, we're thrilled to be working with Sean these last few years as the AT liaison in the southern region. But we have the green and the whites in the north, and then the 6 national forests in the south. And I'll also add that the AT traverses 88 counties and 168 townships and municipalities, because we always want to be thinking about our AT communities as well. And our partners cooperatively manage the AT where the trail passes through their lands. So when you talk about the role of the National Park Service in the administration of the AT, we have a lot of bullet points here that talk about our duties and responsibilities. And I know that there are going to be follow-up sessions to explore certain areas of AT management in more detail. But I just wanted to provide a quick overview of what our APA team, once again, primarily based in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, what we work on. And we always work closely with ATC, with all the members of the clubs, and a multitude of other partners, including the Forest Service, our state park partners, and nonprofit organizations. And our role really is to facilitate and coordinate preservation and protection of the AT. Sometimes we're in a lead role, sometimes we're in a supporting role, depending upon the park or the program or the issue that everyone's working on collectively. And for APA, for the National Park Service team, we're small but mighty. We have less than 10 staff, but as you can see by those different bullet points, we're responsible for a lot of different program areas and issues and projects. For planning and environmental review of proposed projects including what we call external threats, we review in our office projects and programs to make sure they're consistent with the trail's mission. And sometimes those are internal to our AT Cooperative Management System, take trail relocations or shelter construction, for example. But then we look at a host of external issues, everything from wind farms to transmission lines, pipelines, casinos, and we even had a proposal a few years back for a missile interceptor site in Maine. So that's where a lot of our time and energy is focused, is looking at all these different proposals that could potentially adversely impact the trail from Maine to Georgia. Then we have visitor and resource protection, and we're responsible for visitor and resource protection for that 130,000 acres that we directly own out of our APA office and over 1,200 miles of boundary, which is quite extensive. And APA-owned lands are from Northern Virginia through Maine. But everything we do is in partnership. So we work with our federal, our state, and our local law enforcement, fire, and first responders. We also track and monitor unlawful activity trail-wide, and we also track wildland fire and search and rescue operations up and down the trail also. For volunteerism, as you know, AT volunteers perform a wide range of duties, and we work together to ensure volunteer protections and safety. Everything from being involved in developing job hazard analyses, standard operating procedures, and we also provide funding to support training and equipment such as Sawyer training. Special use permits, a lot of folks may not be too familiar with that, but we have a really active permit program, and we have more than 70 per year that we usually administer. One is agricultural special use permits, and we have those up and down the trail in certain areas to maintain or enhance that pastoral character that's traditional for the AT. We also have what we call right-of-way and construction permits, and those focus on work for pre-existing cell towers, transmission lines, power lines, etc. And then we have other special activities about weddings and films that if a project proponent meets certain requirements, then we'll permit that activity, as long as there's no detrimental impact to the resources and values of the AT. Environmental monitoring and research permits, once again, a really active research program, everything from migratory birds to rare plants, invasive species, water quality monitoring. So a lot is happening in that area. And then trail and facility asset management. I think most volunteers are probably very familiar with what's going on in that area and the work that we do. Over the past few years, our office has received funding from the National Park Service for an inventory of all AT assets, as we call them. And we worked with ATC and the clubs for the first time ever to complete an inventory of the trail. So every water bar, every stone step, you name it, it's been inventoried. And that's so we have an accurate account of all of our assets that we're charged with protecting. And then therefore, we've been able to seek appropriate funding to maintain those assets and improve them. And we're also involved in maintaining and managing certain structures along the AT and overseeing various project funding sources. And our assets include not just the trail itself, but we have bridges, as many of you know, tunnels, buildings, shelters, parking lots. The boundary we consider an asset. We have 6 dams. One is a high hazard dam, water systems, and what we call maintained landscapes. So when you hear us talking about trail assets, that's all included in that bucket and in that description. And then also part of our team, we have a GIS specialist who works hand in glove with ATC's GIS specialist, and he provides everything from maps and data and other materials to staff, to volunteers, to planners and scientists, so that we can coordinate our mapping efforts up and down the trail. And that's used for trail management, for resource management, environmental monitoring, emergency response. If we have an incident, we're able to pull up that GIS layer and see exactly in what county, in what state, with what first responder we may need to reach out given the particular incident. And also GIS is incredibly important when we're analyzing external developments. And then natural and cultural resource management, we have incredible natural and cultural resources, as all of you know, up and down the AT. And over the last few years, our team has sought and received funding focused on establishing critical baseline data that enables the partnership to make informed management decisions. For example, we've recently completed in the past few years a geologic resource inventory for the entire AT, vegetation mapping, visual resource inventories that many of you were involved in the pilot program. And we've also begun a natural resource condition assessment with Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania. And also, as all of you know, the AT is rich in history. We like to say it's a journey through American heritage. And the trail is currently eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. And during my tenure at APA, we've been working to formally nominate it and list it on the National Register. And once again, many of you have been involved in reviewing state documentation and providing feedback to us. It's the most complex National Register project in the entire National Park Service. And we also receive funding for other cultural resource projects such as archaeological assessments. And we also have been consulting in the past 2 years with 34 American Indian tribes who have some interest in a portion of the AT, which is really exciting. It brings us a whole new constituency and partnership with Native American tribes. And then another item I wanted to mention is 5 years ago, along with ATC, we became co-conveners for the AT Landscape Partnership. And that focuses on a variety of issues with a host of partners, from local land trusts to national organizations like the Trust for Public Land. And we're focused on land protection and acquisition, resilience in the age of climate change, and other land conservation trends and innovation. So that's a really exciting partnership that is bringing new people to the AT, to our ecosystem, so to speak, and really enriching all the work that we do. In winding down for interpretation, education, and outreach, we provide funding to ATC for things like teacher workshops and training, programming, some projects we lead out of our office, which includes the Wayfinding Project, and in 2021, we have funding for what we call a long-range interpretive plan for the entire trail, which is another project that we're really excited about. And then to wrap up, agreements and administration, that makes it all possible. Back in 2014, we signed a 10-year cooperative agreement with the ATC. We renewed that, and it gives us the authority to move funds to ATC, which then go for various projects and programs working with all of you in the clubs. Everything from trail maintenance to resource management, volunteerism, I've mentioned teacher workshops, hazard tree removal, and the AT Landscape Partnership, to name a few. We also have agreements with all 14 states through which the AT traverses, and they include a variety of signatories, everyone from the Park Service, ATC, a respective local club, the State Historic Preservation Office, state police, and other entities that are applicable to that respective state. And we also have agreements with our partner NPS units, those 6 parks that we showed the slide of just a few moments ago. And those agreements also include ATC and the local club. So we're really excited about the future. We continue to move the AT to the next level, thanks to the help of all of you, and incredibly thrilled to be part of the partnership.
The forest of which the AT traverses along those forests is under the discretion of the forest supervisor. And so my role in that is really to try to be a liaison between the Forest Service units in the districts and the regional office, and then working with Wendy and her team and ATC to help have a consistent approach across the forest along the AT. And so we coordinate regular with National Park Service, and I think it's a model that works quite well. In addition, we through the regional office, we do have a couple of agreements that help fund some resource protection work and crews along the Appalachian Trail.
You know, Wendy, at the conclusion of her section, touched on agreements and administration. Our next session is centered on agreements that help kind of mobilize the work for volunteers and for kind of our cooperative work together. So we'll take a little bit deeper exploration of that in the next session. And then we will be talking about volunteer and project leadership, and to the degree that there's kind of the process involved in funds requests and project formulation and things like that. We'll be touching on when we touched on the history of the trail earlier, it's clear that volunteers have been involved since the beginning. They were integral to the creation of the trail, and they have developed and maintained it ever since. In recognition of these contributions, the law, National Trail System Act, states that it seeks to encourage and assist volunteer citizen involvement in the planning, development, maintenance, and management, where appropriate, of trails. It's an integral part of the work of managing a trail is citizen involvement, is volunteers who care and give. And so I wanted to just beg the question, what are ways that people volunteer in support of the Appalachian Trail? Certainly trail maintenance is one, so I took the easy one. Are there other things that you can think of that volunteers do to support the trail? And if so, what are they? Ned Coons suggests making donations to ATC as a form of volunteerism. That's great. We like that for sure. Boundary monitoring, which Wendy talked about the boundary of the Appalachian Trail being the second largest only to Wrangell St. Elias in Alaska. So that is a big job, and volunteers are doing that, which is incredible. Community outreach, woohoo! Getting awareness raised for the protection of the AT and surrounding communities. Trail ambassadors, those are folks often on the trail educating visitors about leave no trace and kind of land ethic that could improve their and future visitors' experiences. Oh, here's a good one. Manage the Trail Club Facebook page, right? So doing the promotion and publications of the organization to continue to engage new volunteers and recruit new folks. We've got volunteer ridge runners again. They are very much like trail ambassadors. Those names are synonymous. John Phillips with Natural Bridge AT Club says local club administration. So running the ins and outs of the club as an organization, thinking about risk management and volunteer recruitment and board leadership and balancing the books. All of that stuff is super important for the longevity of that volunteer entity. Mark Heedy with Old Dominion, I think, right? Old Dominion. Invasive species control and leading hikes. And certainly when people get exposure to the Appalachian Trail through hikes and kind of gain an appreciation through that kind of interpretive experience that they gain, they often come back as volunteers, right? They have a connection with the land and want to return. Maintaining facilities, cleaning shelters, privies, all of that are big duties that volunteers are responsible for. And invasive species control as it relates to plants helps maintain forest health. That was a lot. And there's more probably that we haven't even mentioned. I'm gonna pass this over to Trudy Phillips, who's gonna talk a little bit more about AT clubs and how they fit in.
There are 31 different clubs, as most of us know, and they're all very different. So how we fit into this can be very complicated. Some of the clubs are responsible for hundreds of miles of the trail, and some are only have 10 or so miles. So exactly how the club looks at it can be different. But in an overall sense, our responsibilities are the same. All those things we listed, we all are supposed to do them to one extent or another. So first of all, there's a volunteer service agreement, a VSA, that each of the clubs should have with their land manager. That's kind of your permission to go out there and do work on the land. It's literally your volunteer service agreement. I mean, literally as a volunteer, you need this. Usually we have these as a club. And then there's a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, which is between the clubs and ATC. And a lot of times we think of, gee, the clubs are doing all sorts of things. But if you look at what Wendy listed for what the Park Service is responsible for, some of those duties are partially handed off to ATC that then works with the clubs to do their individual parts. The MOU includes things like you coordinate with ATC as to what work you're going to do on the treadway and make sure things meet the current standards. Some of that is through books that have been published, and some of it's through policies that are published. You're supposed to review and revise documents and agreements related to AT management, and those are filled with acronyms, which you probably found in your list of acronyms. We also are required to participate in AT management through the regional partnership committees. You need to have both a representative and an alternate that attend your appropriate regional partnership committee. The other thing clubs will do is they'll monitor and maintain the boundaries of the AT corridor, and this would be on APA managed land. So that's part of the land that APA actually owns. And then there are optional things that clubs can do. They can work on natural resources, getting rid of invasive plants. They could work on cultural resources. And then there are community outreach and new partnerships that some clubs are into or some not. And again, these are all optional things that your club can decide whether you want to do it or not. They're not required. Whereas maintaining the treadway, reviewing documents, participating in the regional partnership committees, and monitoring boundaries, if you have boundaries to monitor, are required of each of the clubs.
Thank you, Trudy. I'm going to advance us to the kind of next component of the cooperative management system, which is the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and Sandy Mara is going to speak to that.
So good evening, everybody. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. We're the mortar between the bricks that create the foundation of how we care for this resource. You know, we're primarily the group that tries to hold everybody together. We act as a liaison between the National Park Service and our volunteer clubs and other partners. We bring to the federal government issues and concerns that our folks on the ground are usually the first to point out. And if there are issues and concerns that can't be addressed with volunteer labor or, you know, ATC directly, and we need the support of our federal and state partners, most of the time we'll be the ones to help broker those conversations. We do a lot in supporting, particularly the work that APA does as it relates to mitigating threats, working in making sure that the voice of the Appalachian Trail, the Conservancy, and its constituents are heard through a myriad of different filings and court cases and all the way up to the Supreme Court, quite frankly. But at the end of the day, went to the heart of how we manage the trail, which is really this incredibly complex, but incredibly successful cooperative management system. I was really incredibly lucky to be able to go and watch those hearings and listening to the justices trying to get their heads around this concept of this trail that is a continuous thing going from Georgia to Maine. And yet and I think it was Justice Kagan who said, so are you trying to tell me that the trail is actually something that floats above the land on which it crosses? And that in a way really is, you know, what it does, right? So when we're going through the forest, it's the Forest Service that has the primary responsibility and is our primary partner. When it crosses lands that are outside of the forest, it's either in National Park Service units like Shenandoah, or it's on lands that the National Park Service has purchased specifically to protect the Appalachian Trail. And then you get into states like Pennsylvania, and lots of times we're crossing through game lands, different state parks. So it's just this whole myriad of partners and areas and lands. Kind of that overarching theme that runs through everything is that the Appalachian Trail Conservancy is there to help guide, to help facilitate communications, to help to convene all the necessary parties for any given problem at any given moment.
Great, thank you, Sandy. But this concept of the intersection of civic engagement and land management partners, which could be the National Park Service, the Forest Service, or any one of the 14 states or their entities, as well as the volunteer maintaining clubs. The cooperation is really essential, and it's through our shared priorities and work where our efforts really center and unite centrally at the AT. I think this Venn diagram is really nice in that it recognizes the autonomy of the organizations as well as the shared interests that each of them have toward this kind of common effort. So, you know, on the left, we've got land managers, we've got state SEALs representing the states. DCNRs, and then clubs, and then ATC. So, we thought it might be helpful to think through a sample project as part of this. So we'll aim to be brief in describing kind of a sample project that illustrates the ways in which we work with partners.
Thanks, Leanna. This is Wendy again, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about a partnership in Virginia in the Roanoke area. It's called the Triple Crown Partnership, and I really see that as a great example of the evolution of cooperative management and the cooperative management system. And for a long time, we've talked about the three-legged stool, and I really see us evolving into that big tent and thinking about who has been at the table, who's joined us recently, but who isn't there yet, and how can we continue to bring more folks in to the great work that we do of preserving and protecting the AT. And for the Triple Crown Partnership, it really began with Andrew Downs, the Virginia Regional Director for ATC, pulling a bunch of different folks together, us in the Park Service, the Forest Service at the George Washington Jefferson National Forest, the Roanoke Appalachian Trail Club, a key partner there, and then really expanding beyond the traditional partners. For the Triple Crown Partnership, we have the Virginia Department of Transportation that's a very active member, Roanoke County, Virginia Tech, the Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional Commission, the Catawba Greenways Project. So maybe 5 years ago or so, we pulled all those folks together. We have regular meetings, and it really energized the partnership around the AT in that area. And so many different projects and programs have been a result of that very fruitful and productive partnership. One is funding to the Virginia Department of Transportation for a bridge across Route 311 at McAfee's Knob to provide for visitor safety. And when we talk about the Triple Crown, everyone generally refers to McAfee's Knob, Dragon's Tooth, and Tinker Cliffs, that whole area. And so that led to funding for a bridge project that is very active and moving forward very quickly. Also, thanks to the Roanoke Appalachian Trail Club, they began some early work around visitor use management and pulling together data, pulling the partners together, and really working through a visitor use management framework. And then the Park Service, we've been able to receive funding for an official visitor use management plan for the Triple Crown, building upon that great work by our ATC and other partners. And we also were able to receive funding through the Department of Transportation for a feasibility study for a shuttle system, once again, to really deal with some of the visitor use management issues there. And then also we were able to receive funding to bring Dr. Jeff Marion from Virginia Tech on board a few years ago to do some resource studies, not just in that area, but up and down the trail. So I think that's a really good example of work that brings together new stakeholders and expands the traditional AT partnership, which really has enriched the cooperative management system. And that's just one example that we wanted to share with everybody.
So we wanted to take a couple minutes in conversation in small groups and look at what makes cooperative management work. It's definitely a relationship. Friendships, marriages, roommate situations, all of it requires cooperation. And so I'm hoping that we can discuss the qualities or characteristics that you think would be most effective and important as part of cooperative management. Okay, we should have everybody back. So you can either by way of chat, pop in ideas, or it might be really nice to hear from people. So if you're someone who said, yeah, you'd be willing to share back a couple ideas, would you just give us like one or two that your group came up with on what qualities or characteristics would be important to effective cooperative management?
Okay, we talked about some disconnection in the RPC system where the local clubs and the RPCs may have come to an agreement which had to be bounced up the chain of command in PS or NFS, which kind of made a disconnect from the way we could reach an agreement with RPC and have that kind of be propagated efficiently. And there was some sentiment for authority to be put at the local level. So a little bit too much bureaucracy when we went up the government agency chain to make things run efficiently from the club perspective.
Okay, so working as locally as possible is certainly a good kind of tenet of cooperative management. So to the degree that you're working at the most local level possible. Is there someone else who wants to kind of wave at their camera or raise their hand using Zoom? Yes, Mark.
We talked about a bunch of stuff, but a couple of them were, to make sure that everybody has a voice to the extent possible, some equality in their footing, in their position there. I think that was important. Outreach and communication, really important. It'd be really important so that everybody's informed when they're making decisions, but there's got to be a robust back and forth amongst everybody. I think that's it. And then I'll throw one more out there. I think it's also helpful to have a set of rules, a box, at least a general box. I mean, you can certainly go out of it, but a structure that helps everybody know how to operate and where the sandbox is.
So I'm hearing a couple things in terms of the sandbox. Is this a little like here are our a little bit of our rules of engagement, like ground rules that we all agree to?
Yeah.
In terms of how we work together. That's a great model for any group dynamic. That's awesome. I picked up on your kind of the quest for clear understanding, right? That comes through communication, and that was also something that the group I had joined teed up. Is there anything else?
I'll share from our group, Leanna. Trust and transparency, and then identifying priorities and developing a strategy.
And Matt, did you want to share anything?
Yeah, just several of the things people have already mentioned, but also just an understanding of the roles and responsibilities of different partnerships. It kind of goes to the sandbox a little bit. What are the boundaries that folks have? And what are the specific responsibilities that really are non-negotiable because they're core to that organization?
Yeah, Matt, thank you so much for bringing that back around. In terms of things that are core and that a lot of times they're kind of law sometimes that has to be followed, or other things. I mean, I appreciate Mark's comment in the chat. He said flexibility is a valuable part of partnership, and I think that that's an interesting balance to every vote counts, right? Which is a little bit different in the sense that we aim for consensus and complete agreement, but we don't always get it. But we certainly want everybody to feel heard, valued, respected, and part of the process. And we learn a lot through that. I mean, I think in my experience working with the AT Cooperative Management System, often our work takes longer because of the cooperation and collaboration and to get input from a variety of partners, but we end up with far better products and a lot better end result as a result. So I don't know if I put all those pieces together in a way that makes sense, but it's not all cut and dry. And Trudy and I just wanted to thank you, for having those conversations and bringing them back. That was valuable. Trudy and I wanted to just talk a little bit more about a few tools related to cooperative management that help guide our work and tee up kind of where we're headed for the next session. I just wanted to point these documents out. There are local management plans that clubs write and have collaboration with their land management partners around and with ATC around it. There's a kind of a review process for those local management plans. Each club has one. They're in varying degrees of recency. Some of them go way back and are probably in need of an update, but they are kind of the resource guide for the club that says this is how we're managing and caring for our section of trail. And that might actually be a little bit variable and different from the club that maintains Trail North. So it is a cool tool. The comprehensive plan lays out a lot of the kind of principles for which the AT is managed, and the foundation document continues to build on that and is a guiding resource for the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. These are all super important, and so I encourage you to take a look. And so Trudy's going to just talk a little bit about, someone mentioned ATC policies earlier, conservation and trail management policies, and Trudy's going to talk to us a little bit about that process.
Okay, on the right side here is the long and drawn out procedure that it takes to do a policy. And if you actually look at the original document, it's kind of hard to read here in the small version. Everybody gets involved before we actually say something is a policy. The clubs, through the RPCs, ATC, the land managers, all get involved. So it's not like changes in policies or even policies being written happens without everybody's involvement. And if you don't want to be involved, people will bypass you, but the policies get written. It's complex, and sometimes it can take quite a bit of time before we resolve all the issues between the stewardship of council, RDC, and the land managers. There are a couple of things that have been developed recently. Check-in, check-out policy. I imagine all of your clubs have been talking about that because that hit up early in the year. Visitor use management policy is actually now a policy, and there's a whole committee that's trying to develop that and make so that each of the clubs actually does commit to visitor use management and works through it. It's a multi-step process that's rather complicated on looking in from the outside, but with Morgan Somerville's leadership, where they're making so that it's easier for clubs to figure out how to do it. There's a prescribed burn policy. You look at all of these and you say, gee, these all started on high. But there also have been some policies that have been started at the club level. One of the clubs didn't like the Forest Service's bridge policy. So there is now a bridge policy in terms of what size bridge is built along the AT and whether you have to have a bridge that's all the way gigantic up above the 100-year floodplain. So now if clubs have issues that they want to bring forward, they can also be turned into policies, and the clubs have a real say in them.
Thanks, Trudy. So you've probably had lots of questions bubbling up in your head. If there are things that are bubbling up for you now, or kind of questions around the cooperative management system, based on this introduction, please pop them in the chat or feel free to ask them out loud. Cosmo makes a really excellent point in the chat. He says that it should be noted that ATC policies are not regulations, but that they are communication tools for our partners and our visitors. So they're developed with all partners at the table, for sure. They may not be the policy of our land management partners. I'm gonna wrap us up. Thanks for joining us.